So today's video is the final in Mr. Ego's series on homosexuality titled Causes of Same-Sex Attraction. The description rather egotistically reads as quote, having proven that homosexuality was never scientifically declassified as a mental illness and that it's strongly linked to psychological dysfunction, the question remains, what causes this if it isn't innate? End quote. So let's start to pull this sucker apart for what's hopefully the last time.
If homosexuality isn't innate, what causes it? In the past, I've proven that, aside from conjecture and speculation, there's no evidence for same-sex attraction being innate because radicals used the sexual revolution to promote junk science about human sexuality. Initially, this was the belief that same-sex attraction isn't a form of mental illness because you can be born homosexual or heterosexual. As other sexualities have been added, this has become ever more irrational, although many apologists don't care because the real aim is sexual fluidity, where all sexual behaviour is acceptable. At no point has any science conclusively proven any of these theories, and every time this agenda moves forward, the lack of reason and evidence is covered up through political correctness that demonises anyone that goes against the narrative. But if homosexuality isn't innate and is indeed a mental illness, what causes this behaviour?
Well, the first thing you need to do is demonstrate any of what you have just asserted as at current. I've reviewed your previous 3 videos on the subject and no, you've done no such thing. Your idea of science amounts to a couple of TV shows, a single study from the wrong continent, and your personal opinion dredged from numerous conspiracy theories. But unsurprisingly, you remain seemingly oblivious to your lack of ability. In this, you have become an apex example of the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Those that promote the born this way myth will often argue that it's just as hard for a homosexual to be straight as it is for a heterosexual to be gay. Not only is this intellectually dishonest, but it doesn't even conform to the left's own theory about sexuality, where it's a fluid concept that changes throughout one's life.
Fun fact, Mr. E, you lack the capacity to move a continent. Now, me saying that fact does not then mean I'm contradicting myself, since I hold to plate tectonics, in which said continental plates do move and shift about on their own. It's simply me noting the very simple facts that not everything in the universe is subject to human control. Whether or not a person's sexuality can shift over the course of their lifetime, or whether it's their understanding of their own identity, is rather irrelevant. That fact does not then mean we have control over it. Perhaps a better analogy would be age. People get older over time. That does not then mean I can control for their age. Now, we discussed changing one's sexuality previously and how the poorly named reparative therapy has never stood for a single clinical trial and is considered a human rights violation by civilized nations. But even giving you the hypothetical that it indeed could change and that we could be the agents behind said change, that fact would in no way make it a mental illness, nor would it justify attempts to change another person's sexuality. What matters is this important thing called informed consent. It's an absence of understanding said informed consent that results in willfully ignorant bigots comparing homosexuality to paedophilia.
Some people may ask why I'm focusing on same-sex attraction when there are so many other absurd and dangerous sexual behaviours that people are trying to normalise, like teaching little children about transgenderism or that paedophilia is another sexual orientation. The answer is easy to see when you understand how the lie about being homosexual has become the foundation for every other sexual orientation. Therefore, once this lie has been discredited, the entire house of cards regarding multiple sexualities will come crashing down.
Told you. No, trans rights are not dependent on LGBT rights, but rather the simple concept of bodily autonomy and a scientific understanding of human sexual variation beyond the simplified footnotes offered by secondary school biology. As for paedophilia, I return to what I said and how this demonstrates your lack of understanding of the concept of informed consent. Truthfully, people who make this argument should be put on some sort of police observation list, as there is literally nothing standing between them raping someone other than the fact that they were told rape is wrong. This is what an education lacking in basic ethics results in, a side product of religions which have, for the longest time, killed any secular competition to their worldview.
Since I'm covering the causes of same-sex attraction, I'll briefly mention 8 studies involving a huge sample of 33,000 pairs of identical twins taken from an Australian register. Over 2 decades, this register was studied by researchers in Australia, Scandinavia, and the United States. What they found was that both twins are only gay 11% of the time. Why is this important, one might ask? Because identical twin studies are the gold standard of genetic research, since if a trait is genetic, both twins would have the same feature. In more recent memory, findings like this have led to apologists moving on to epigenetics, where genes can switch on or off, depending on environmental causes. But this is a field still in its infancy, and we certainly don't have any evidence for a gene that can switch certain sexualities on or off. As usual, apologists are promoting a hypothesis that's never been proven, and using political correctness to shoehorn their agenda through.
This is a mess in so many ways, it's frankly disturbing. For a start, Mr. E is conflating genetics and intrinsic traits, exposing a reductionist view of the matter. Genes do play a part in how a person develops, but they are in no way the only factor involved, a fact that has been known for a long time. That's why nobody ever went around making the assertion that sexuality was solely the result of genetics. That is nothing but a straw man which Mr. E is presenting. Now, where does the straw man come from? Well, Mr. E sourced it from an online article on a Christian website discussing a non-scientific book first published back in 1999. The book is titled My Genes Made Me Do It, Homosexuality and the Scientific Evidence, and is written by conservative Christians who selectively quote parts of studies or even completely edit the results as a means to validate Christian bigotry. They self-published in hopes of breaking into academia, but their hopes were quickly deflated as their book was found to not meet academic standards or scientific accuracy. Since then, they've taken to republishing their book every few years, getting them a wave of articles on Christian websites, before falling back into trying to get people to read their book by offering it for free on their website. And yes, I could spend months going through the entire book, or hell, even one chapter. But since Mr. E can't be bothered to make a specific claim about specific studies, why should I? I've already read various sources of his to find out that he's lied about what they stated. Hell, one he presented as a study of homosexuality in America was actually a study of homosexuality in Israel. Also, right now you let on that you know you're talking a load of shit, in that you know things such as epigenetics exist, which, contrary to what you state, is not some new and as of yet unestablished field of science. There comes a point where I'm going to have to stop doing your work for you, and this is it. If you reference a specific study or specific claim, I'll investigate it. If you send me on a wild goose chase, it's not my job to read what you can't be bothered to read yourself. The fact remains, however, through all of this, it is still impossible to change a person's sexuality, something agreed upon by the scientific consensus and stated clearly by the American Psychological Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the UK Council for Psychotherapy, and the World Psychiatric Association, to name a few. A fact that the website My Genes Made Me Do It actively lies about. So right off the bat, from the evidence provided by numerous sources and the entire scientific consensus, we can tell this website, these authors, do not know what the fuck they are talking about. But again, even if it weren't, that still would not be an argument against homosexuality and any other form of non-heterosexual attraction. You keep crying red herring at everything, but the real red herring here is you and your pretense that genes are the only thing that decides default attraction, or that this in any way impacts whether something is right or wrong. Frankly, it's irrelevant. This entire thread of discussion is designed to draw attention from the fact that you, as with many other Christians and religious bigots, don't understand the basic principles of informed consent and bodily autonomy.
The bottom line is that there's no gene for sexuality, and the reason is so elementary that it amazes me that people would refuse to accept it. Our biology is intrinsically linked to our identity and behaviour. There are indeed genes that shape our biology, but there aren't really any behavioural genes per se. Rather, the way our anatomy is formed affects our behaviour. Before people assume I'm agreeing with sexual fluidity, let me explain. People with a postmodern view often demand that we find irrefutable genetic proof before we can insist that something is true. Aside from the fact that we know lots of things are real without actually being able to explain them scientifically, this is a kind of logical fallacy called an appeal to ignorance. We know that the brain is linked to intelligence, so we don't need to find a gene for intelligence because the genes that shape the brain are those very genes. Therefore, when we talk about different intelligence between men and women or ethnic and racial groups, it would be far more fruitful to study brain differences between these people. In other words, insisting for genes related to intelligence is a red herring because the brain itself is all the evidence you need in a rational sense. We know the brain is linked to intelligence, and by extension, all genes linked to the brain are intelligence genes. But what does this have to do with sexuality? Well, the same conclusion can be drawn with human sexual behaviour, where our biology is directly linked to the way this comes about. Like intelligence, there's no sexuality gene per se, and once again, this is a postmodern red herring. Instead, there are genes that shape our reproductive organs and sex at birth, which directly ties in with our sexual behaviour. Part of this is based on our sexual anatomy, as well as our development as either male or female. All our biology is tied to this process, which is why men and women look so different and often act so differently as well. When the left is faced with an objective conclusion like this, they often revert to the continuum fallacy. For example, stating that because some girls are taller than boys, height has nothing to do with sex. But we know that on average men are taller than women. They also like to suggest that minor abnormalities in hormone levels can lead to massive changes in human sexuality. But whenever hormone changes are drastic, they're physically apparent, like being born a hermaphrodite. Likewise, some people exhibit sexual behaviours that aren't biologically normal, but this doesn't mean that sexual behaviour isn't inherently tied to human biology. Now we've explained the biological basis for sexual behaviour, we can refer to the real explanation for same-sex attraction: adverse human experiences.
When did you explain the biological basis for sexual behaviour? What preceded this was nothing more than 3.5 minutes of rambling assertion that led to the total non sequitur you just gave. If you want to talk about body structure and teleology again, I'm all for it. But I'll need you to explain why an entity would make things such as anal sex pleasurable, particularly with a prostate, not forgetting that it's not just gay people who partake in it. If what we see is in fact the result of design and intent, then by maintaining that premise, a consistent conclusion would include homosexuality as part of that design. Now, I don't hold to design, I hold to evolution, which hinges on variation. Limbs which were once used for walking may in fact be used for gliding, which over time may become flying. Not that any moral conclusion can be wrought from that, since evolution, as with all science, is amoral. The way things are does not tell us how things should be. Only we as people making value claims can do that, which is why I keep coming back to informed consent and bodily autonomy, two values I hold very dearly. Meanwhile, you don't seem to just disagree, you seem to be completely oblivious of their existence.
If a human being has a relatively well-rounded childhood, they'll never turn to same-sex attraction. Don't listen to the lies from people with same-sex attraction that don't admit what they went through growing up. Many that aren't invested in the born this way myth or aren't trying to score political points in a given moment or situation will openly admit the effect their youth had on their sexual development. So is there some kind of pattern that explains how same-sex attraction develops? The answer is yes. Before explaining, it's important to understand that human psychology is complex. While we can provide an outline for this, we must bear in mind that not all human beings will be affected by adverse experiences in the same way, and these experiences vary. It's also important to note that although we can't prove certain experiences without a testimony or proof, there are some things we can observe with or without them. Through a combination of observation and testimony, we can see that there are 3 stages in the development of same-sex attraction: attachment, sex, and sexual. These play out through childhood and adolescence and have a profound effect in adulthood. The attachment stage involves problems with key figures in a child's life. Often this is linked to parents, but other important figures like teachers, family friends, and siblings can be involved. In this stage, the child's impression of masculinity and femininity is damaged by adverse experiences. For example, a child may have a submissive, abusive, or neglectful father that creates a longing for a strong male role model. Alternatively, the mother may be an overbearing and controlling member of the family that belittles the father and dominates her children.
My mom was also extremely critical of my father. She didn't approve of a lot of things he did, including his drinking. And so she talked him down to me. So I lost respect for him, and I clung to my mom.
When people say that people are born gay, I think it's a cop-out. I wasn't born gay. I was sexually abused. I was brought into this. That's my story. When I first was abused when I was 2 years old, I don't remember it at all. I remember because my sister has told me that it happened. Did that affect my life? You better believe it did. And so when people say, well, you're born that way, sometimes you're not even remember what happened to you at such an early age. You just don't know.
In stage 2, a wounded sense of identity emerges, linked to the way one relates to their sex. Due to insecurity, the subject develops an unhealthy impression of masculinity, femininity, or both, leading to negative psychological feelings like depression and anxiety.
Same-sex attraction appears or comes to the surface when I feel inferior, when I don't feel manly enough, when I don't feel masculine enough. Acting out on same-sex attraction is nothing more than chasing this kind of male identity.
A lot of what I was thinking about was, wow, he has a really nice body. I really like that body. I wish I could have that. Envy and jealousy going on there, thinking about it far too much.
In the final stage, the subject makes a connection between same-sex attraction and the psychological scars of their past, gaining short-term satisfaction from acting on these urges. This, however, causes shame and guilt that's projected onto people that don't share their views on sexuality. Hence the reason that same-sex attraction is connected to such self-destructive behaviour and an obsession with forcing everyone to conform to this lifestyle.
I first got involved in my early 20s by cruising parks and bars. I felt lost, and without direction and without meaning.
During those experiences, it was quite, I would say, I thought I was happy because it was all that satisfaction, those needs being met right in an instant in a very powerful way. The next day I would be empty and depressed.
Many people feel threatened by same-sex attraction being a form of mental illness shaped by adverse experiences because they might be the cause of this in someone they know. Alternatively, they take it personally because someone they care about has same-sex attraction. But we can't allow this to prevent us from understanding this behaviour or providing effective professional support for those in need, especially as children are increasingly exposed to this behaviour. As we can very well see, This leads to terrible psychological consequences.
First, I just want to apologise to my viewers for putting you through Mr. E's unending ignorance across these 4 videos. The pseudoscientific crap that spews forth from his secondary anus, located where most normal people have their mouths, is never pleasant. Honestly, I watched this video hoping to see some actual evidence, the evidence Mr. E has failed to supply in each video thus far, and all I received is further crap. So Mr. E thinks that because LGBT+ people who have been abused have a warped perception of love and sexual attraction, that means all LGBT+ people are the result of abuse. To see how fucking stupid this one is, one would only have to flip the narrative. I can easily find countless heterosexual victims of abuse who have warped notions of sex and love. That, the warping, is a fucking result of abuse. But if I were to conclude that therefore heterosexuality is the result of abuse, period, Mr. E would lose his shit. But that's exactly what he's doing. He's a cheap fucking liar that wants to play pretend when it comes to science. He offers no evidence, no genuine testable merit for a single one of his old defecations that stands to the slightest of scrutiny. All it would take is one medical analysis of so-called reparative therapy to come out and validate it as a practice, as with every other method, every other medicine, every other therapy, but he can't fucking do that because it doesn't fucking exist. And yeah, I'm a little hacked off at having wasted hours literally sifting through the sewage that is the pseudoscience of Mr. E for nothing. Mr. E, much like Ken Ham from the Creation Museum, is all about the pretense of science. He thinks it's a word to mention again and again, as if that makes what he asserts without any valid evidence at all actual science. He can't even read a journal article properly, yet he thinks he has the ability to claim others are simply running on an ideological dictate. He and his fans that consume his waste without scrutiny are everything that is wrong with human society. They are the uncritical, the joyfully ignorant, the deceitfully projective troglodytes, living fossils from millennia past. I began this video in September and considered quitting, because honestly, I felt my time was worth more than this. But people kept asking and I had only halfway to go, so I decided to bite the bullet and just get it over with. And I'm thankfully fucking glad. To cut through Mr. E's pure fantasy and come out the other side makes me happy to not share his unending desire to warp reality, to celebrate in one's unending ignorance like he does. Hi there, I'd just like to say a few things here at the end of the video. First, I'd like to thank everyone who's ever donated to the channel via Patreon, giving a special thanks to the following people: Hannah Banghart, Matthew Kovac, John Schoenrock, Daniel Martinez, Ernst Puna, and Alexander Williams. Your support has ensured this channel its ability to grow over the years, and really is the only thing that manages to keep the channel afloat. I'd also like to ask that you comment down below and like this video, as well as subscribe and follow Essence of Thought on both Facebook and Twitter. Please also consider following Atheist Alliance International on Facebook, an organisation dedicated to helping atheists around the globe. Any comments utilising language which insults others on the basis of perceived gender, sexuality, ethnicity or ability both mental and physical will be removed immediately, and the commenter may be blocked on the moderator's discretion. Let's keep this space one which upholds the humanist values. Thank you.